Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat
This
shalom.
week's reading is called Shoftim, and we translate that as Judges. Sometime after the Israelites had been settled in the Promised Land, about 80 years, give or take, Israel was oppressed by Jabin, king of the Canaanites. The Canaanites had 900 iron reinforced chariots and many soldiers. The children of Israel cried out to Adonai for help. Just outside Jericho, which fell decades earlier to Joshua, a mother sat under a palm tree in the hills of Ephraim, judging the children of Israel. This is from Judges 4. Now she, meaning Deborah, sent and summoned Barak, son of Abinoam, from Kadesh in Naphtali, and said to him, Hasn't Adonai, God of Israel, commanded, Go, march to Mount Tabor, and take with you 10,000 men of the sons of Naphtali and the sons of Zebulun. Then, at Kishon torrent, I will draw out to you Sisera, commander of Jabin's army, with his chariots and his multitudes, and I will give him into your hand. But Barak said to her, Louder?
We could hear you.
Okay. The third judge in Israel was not a valiant stud carrying a bronze sword, but in fact a mother. We know the story. Barak came down from Mount Tabor with his men and slaughtered the army of the Canaanites, and the commander of the army fled away on foot. He fled to the tent of a woman who was the wife of an ally. Her name was Yael. He asked her for water because he was exhausted. Instead, she gave him milk and a nice blanket and went to stand guard by the door, while he fell into a deep sleep. Then, Yael took a tent pin about a foot long and a hammer and quietly approached him. Then she drove the spike into his head, cutting clear through into the ground. And so, by the hand of two women, Israel was delivered from oppression. Then Barak and Deborah sang a song on that day. Villages were deserted in Israel, deserted, until I, Deborah, arose, a mother in Israel arose. Judges 5, verse 7. I encourage everyone to reread the story of Deborah, but not with Western eyes, but with the eyes of believers. Now, why would I use the term Western eyes? Because some of us read the Holy Scriptures from Western eyes. We see people and events, and we carry our modern-based impressions with us into the stories. What I want to talk about with you today, is really a touchy subject to Western ears, even though most of it is grounded in the Scriptures. I'm going to talk about sex. Now, before you cover the ears of your teens, I need to say it's not about the act, but about the people God chooses, the roles of certain men and women. I'm talking about the people God chooses to lead, and those whom he bestows a spirit of power and wisdom onto, like the mother Deborah, judge of Israel. It is no big secret that the mighty Greeks bestowed many amazing gifts upon humanity, chief among them politics and the political state, democracy, which is a fundamental aspect of American government, originally referred to all men, except slaves, women, and undesirable immigrants. Even our government buildings reflect amazing Greek architecture with soaring columns of marble and granite. Some Greek philosophers have given us other filters, cultural filters, which color everything we see. The roles of men and women, slaves and cattle, were also defined by these ancient Greek scholars. Christianity is a product of modern society, just like our governments and most of our institutions. By contrast, the faith of the Torah did not start out with Western values. Somewhere along the way, Western values were absorbed into Judaism, Christianity, and the Messianic faith. I want to say it started in the Babylonian captivity, but I think it picked up in earnest with the mixing of Greek values. Greco-Roman men were uncircumcised and that became abundantly clear as Jewish men began engaging in Greco-Roman games and wrestling. Aristotle in his writings considered societies prior to the wisdom of Athens barbarians because they allowed women to share power and authority. Plato, who trained Aristotle, shows a clear bias toward women, and Aristotle follows through with greater detail and sometimes outright disdain. I won't quote these long volumes of his writings, but I will share some of his quotes. The temperance of a man and of a woman, or the courage and justice of a man and of a woman, are not, as Socrates maintained, the same. The courage of a man is shown in commanding, of a woman in obeying. Aristotle goes on to say, silence is a woman's glory, but this is not equally the glory of men. Let those words sink in for a moment. Do those concepts sound familiar? Now I know everyone remembers Paul and Timothy's instructions to their new communities. Let's just take a couple of those in context. Let's explore a few passages. 1 Timothy 2. Likewise, the women, when they pray, should be dressed modestly and sensibly in respectable attire, not with elaborate hairstyles and gold jewelry, or pearls, or expensive clothes. Rather, they should adorn themselves with what is appropriate for women who claim to be worshiping God, namely good deeds. Now, let's get a little context on that verse. Greco-Roman women did not just braid their hair like we do in a few rolls tight to the scalp, or one long braid. There is an extensive ceremony involved with loops and strands, jewelry, and incredible head-shaped architecture involved. This process could take the better part of a morning, and it is created by the most talented of temple slaves. When you saw a Roman woman with wealth, you could tell she was wealthy. And you could see it by her status and by her elaborate hairstyle and the clothing she wears. Women of lower standing wore simple styles. There's a forensic archaeologist who spent many years, over a decade, trying to recreate these styles by studying sculptures. The closest modern style we have to relate is Japanese women pre-war, who wore fine, elegant hairstyles, which were impossible to attain in a few minutes and required assistance to do properly, as they sat perfectly still. Roman women of status wore sheer, expensive, and richly dyed silk, traded with traders from India and China. You could not purchase these garments from a street market. Once again, when you see them, it was a head-turning spectacle. We have nothing like this today, except the most expensive fashion markets. When a Roman woman of wealth entered, it was a procession. Common free women or former slaves could not compare. Every man in the room would stop to see these goddesses in their midst. Of course, Timothy and Paul and any other servant of God would put down these elaborate fashion shows of wealth. I encourage you to visit museum exhibits to see what few unsmashed statues of Greco women look like. And then, if not possible, at least watch movie recreations of the period. You'll see that this is very, very elaborate. Jewish women were not spending the whole morning constructing elaborate hairstyles and flaunting expensive jewelry with colorful silk garments. These were women, these Greco-Roman women, had slaves to take care of their homes and husbands who were in the Senate and in the armies of Rome. They had become beautiful swans who lacked education and spent their days in spas. Sadly, some teachers have used these few passages like bludgeons to beat down and suppress women through the centuries, to shut up anyone who challenges male authority. Let's take a look at one more verse, one more passage. This is from 1 Timothy 2. Let a woman learn in peace, fully submitted, but do not permit a woman to teach a man or exercise authority over him. Rather, she is to remain at peace. Now, the amazing thing about this, I had to take this apart. The word authority is the Greek word othen-teno. I may mispronounce it a little bit. It's ancient Koine Greek. It's a strange word, and it only appears once in the New Testament. Its meaning across other Greek documents is, and I'll go through this list very carefully, sometimes it's translated as murder, sometimes originate, sometimes act independently, and dominate as a superior or a master. Ptolemy uses it in reference to astrology, as in Saturn taking control of Mercury. Now, I'm not an astrologist, but I'm smart enough to know one planet does not take control of another. Paul is saying he does not permit a woman to act superior to a man. Paul was correcting the still believed pagan notion that women had a sacred connection to the gods and divine knowledge. You know what we call that today? An oracle. These women, especially in Ephesus at this time, were highly revered by kings, warriors, and businessmen, and their temple ruins are still visible to this day. Some of the pagan women in Ephesus had carried that practice into the new assembly of God and were using it to, quote unquote, guide men. Paul wanted them to stop and learn the ways of the true God. It is a disservice to read Paul and Timothy's struggles without cultural context. Paul and Timothy were talking to Gentile women, not Jewish women, and not to the common woman. Paul is much maligned, but it's out of context. He, in fact, works with several great women, including one he calls an emissary, a fellow emissary. Let that sink in for a moment. And he demands that they be respected in virtually all of his letters. Later on, we'll name a few of those women. Now let's get back to talking about Aristotle. I love Greek literature, as you can tell. Aristotle was the mentor of Alexander the Great. Alexander went on a famous tear, conquering everything from ancient Spain to India and almost every place in between, except Jerusalem. It's a famous story. We won't be talking about that today. The point is, the influence of Greek ideas slowly affected believers when they were ruled for a time in the days of the Maccabees, and later became more entangled with Roman dominance. Make no mistake, nowhere in the scripture does God say women are less than men. Centuries after the Exodus, Adonai states through the prophet Micah, "When I brought you up from the land of Egypt and redeemed you from the house of bondage, I sent before you Moses, Aaron, and Miriam." That's in Micah 6, verse 4. The children of Israel were led from captivity by 3 leaders, the greatest of whom we call Moses, servant of God. Here in Micah was a chance for Adonai to set the record straight. He could have said Moses and Aaron, but he didn't. He included Miriam. Let's explore the biblical foundation. You see, God designed us in pairs. He created a man, Adam, and he allowed him to realize he was incomplete by parading animals in front of him in pairs. Then God took Adam, put him asleep, and from his side designed a woman. Now I paused and I said side, because most of us have been taught by preachers and theologians that God designed Eve from a rib bone, but it should more accurately be rendered as Adam's side. God said, "Let me make man like me, and make women to serve him, and make the man's babies." Oh, wait a minute. Okay, that's the wrong version. I was just testing to see if you guys are still awake, honestly. No, he did not say that. This is what Genesis says. "Then God said, let us make humankind in our image, in the likeness of ourselves, and let them rule over the fish of the sea, the birds in the air, the animals, and over all the earth, and over every crawling creature that crawls on the earth." So God created humankind in his own image. In the image of God created him. Male and female, he created them. We all know that passage is in Genesis 1, 26 through 27. Elohim goes on further and says, "And this is how it was. God saw everything he made, and indeed it was very good." So what happened? Through the years, the centuries, 2 words: culture and tradition. In ancient Greco-Roman society, work is divided up into distinct hard and fast roles. Originally, men were expected to fight in wars to protect the state, while the women stayed at home and took care of the homes. By contrast, God imposed exemptions for Israelite men fighting in wars. He would say to them, because the family was central, these exemptions apply. A man could be excused from battle if he recently married, if he was building a home or planting a vineyard. Why? Because it was Adonai who led the battle, and the men participated with invisible angels. Over time, these roles evolved in both societies. In the Greco-Roman world, women had no rights. They could not own or inherit land. They were confined to their homes, and as mentioned, public events and public baths. This was not so for Israelite women, because God had held them with greater value. Consider the 5 daughters of Zelophehad in Numbers. They appealed for redress, and God granted it to them, giving to them the land that was promised to their father, even though their fathers had no boys. Does this mean every woman in Israel had a plot of land and was free to go on to war like men? No, definitely not. But let's look at this contrast in Proverbs 31. I'm going to read just a selection. She selects wool and flax, and her hands work willingly. She's like merchant ships, bringing her sustenance from afar. She rises while it's still night and provides food for her household and portions for her servant girls. She considers a field and buys it. From the fruit of her hands, she plants a vineyard. She girds herself with strength and invigorates her arms. She discerns that her business is good. Her lamp never goes out at night. Proverbs 31. This level of industry by Greek women was unheard of. The records do not record many women of power at all. Spartan women are mentioned, but Aristotle places the blame for the failures of their society on women having independence and equality with men. In his writings, women in business or gaining any mastery of education was considered barbaric. As we approach more modern times, Western values have prevailed over the roles of men and women. And yet, in Yeshua's day, it was common to see wealthy Israelite women with authority. But some men couldn't accept the Proverbs 31 woman, so they were looked down upon. They were seen as adulterers, or even women for hire. A good example is the woman at the well with Yeshua. Now, think about this story for a moment. Almost immediately, we assume she is an adulterous woman. In paintings, they portray her as beautiful and just a little loose. Yet the scriptures do not say that. Where did those images in our heads come from? Very few of us consider she was an older woman who had gone through several marriages. Not a loose woman. If a young harlot had run back to her village and told everyone, I seriously doubt an entire village would have rushed up the hillside on her word alone. That's a perfect example of reading scriptures through Western eyes. I have stated in other sermons that Mary of Magdalene is a title given to someone of wealthy status in that time period. Yes, she had demons. She worked as a trader in business. Is it possible to pick up demons working in business today? Of course it is. We assume Yeshua roamed the countryside pulling gold coins from under rocks and from the mouths of fish for all of his expenses. In our minds, we see only the 12 men following him. Luke saw something else. And certain women who have been healed of evil spirits and infirmities. Miriam, the one called Magdalene, out of whom 7 demons had gone. Joanna, the wife of Cusa, Herod's finance minister. Suzanne, and many others were supporting them out of their own resources. Not my words. Luke 8:2-3. There were 12 men following him for certain, but also a company of prominent women and numerous other disciples, sometimes reaching into the dozens. As a matter of fact, at one point Yeshua sends out 70 disciples, and there's still a large crowd following him. The women following Yeshua weren't just cleaning up after the boys. They were actively involved in the ministry. They were following him as disciples. The word for their activities in Greek is called diakonos. Let me say it again. Listen to the word. Diakonos. That word should sound familiar to us. It is from their work that we developed the office of the deacon. The definition of a servant minister who performs a service. Let me read it again. The definition of a servant minister who performs a service. Time does not allow me to mention them all, but I will say that Mary of Magdalene is mentioned 12 times in the Gospels, more than some of the male apostles. When they mention the women, she is always listed first. Joanna's husband had a position in Herod's household, and she was likely from a prominent Jewish family. We know this group of prominent women followed Yeshua to the crucifixion. Mark states, there were also women watching from a distance. Among them were Miriam from Magdala, Miriam, the mother of Jacob, the younger, and of Joseph, and Salome. They would follow him and serve him when he was in the Galilee. Now here, this is an amazing statement that many of us miss. Many other women had gone up together with him to Jerusalem. They were there also. Mark 15:40-41. They were the first to see and touch him after he was risen. So, what happened after Yeshua rose to heaven? Did these women go back to running their businesses and kneading bread, taking care of their houses? No. They continued to teach, just as the apostles did. After Paul was converted, he traveled to Philippi. And he didn't find a synagogue there. Remember, he was dealing with Gentile women. But he found women praying at the river. A woman named Lydia, a seller of purple cloth from the city of Thyatira, a God-fearer, was listening. She opened her heart to respond to what Paul was saying. When she was immersed, along with her household, she urged us, saying, "If you have judged me to be faithful to the Lord, come and stay at my house." And she insisted. Acts 16:14-15, a book many of us should spend more time in. Going further, Paul tells us in Romans, "I am introducing you to our sister Phoebe, Shamash of the congregation, and Chendria, so that you may welcome her in the Lord, as God's people should, and give her whatever assistance she may need from you. For she has been a big help to many people, including myself." Romans 8:16, 1-2. Here again we see that word, diakonos. Romans 16 is actually a who's who of leaders, both male and female. While Priscilla and Aquila made their house into an assembly. In the scriptures, Priscilla is always listed first. Remember, in scripture, the most prominent person is always listed first. So now, persecution sets into the people who follow the way of Yeshua. Surely now, women will go back to be happy homemakers. Not so. In fact, not even in Judaism. In fact, there is a woman in the early sages who is mentioned in the Tosefta. Her name is Buriah. She's the only woman in rabbinic literature, and she studied Torah. She is mentioned by name in the Babylonian Talmud. She was born around 220 CE. She was the daughter of a rabbi, and she married a rabbi. But her knowledge of Torah exceeded even her husband's. She was a powerful speaker and was praised by other rabbi contemporaries. Now, of course, all that changed in the Middle Ages. Women were denied study of Torah. During this period, this female's reputation suffered the fate of many women before her. She was edited out of the Babylonian Talmud, but no one could deny that she was one of the great sages. Through the centuries, despite male opposition, God has raised up women leaders in Judaism, in Christianity, and in the Messianic faith. God does not abide by man's restrictions of culture and tradition. I'm going to speak about a sect of Judaism that many of you are familiar with. The founder, Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic sect of Judaism, in the 18th century, gives us his daughter, Idol, who was trained in all aspects of faith by her father. Now keep in mind, this young lady is the daughter of Baal Shem Tov. While away, he wrote her a letter. He said, "To my daughter, Idol, the righteous one who fears the Lord, may she live in peace. Since I must remain a bit longer on my journey, I permit you to issue advice and prescriptions. However, do not send these through any third party, but through your own mouth. Tell the advice and prescriptions to the one who needs it. This is the word of your Father, who blesses you with all good forever. This may explain why today some of the Hasidic sect have begun to turn to Yeshua. Idol preached. She continued to preach. She counseled. She led prayer for both men and women. And she healed the sick. Let me speak about another woman from the 1800s. Hannah Rachel Werbermacher, also known as the Maid of Ludmir. She learned Talmud and for a time served as a Rebbe in her faith, sitting behind a screen so she wouldn't offend the men. And she did that until her tragic ending in 1892. Today, contrary to what we think in our own minds, there are over 700 women who lead Beit Knessets in Judaism, including Rabbi Joanna Samuels from the JCC, a woman I've met, Rabbi Lauren Holtzblatt at IDAS Israel in Washington, D.C., and Rabbi Elsa Stanton, first African-American rabbi, female rabbi. Adonai bestows servants in the body as he sees fit. He does it orderly and in a way that edifies the believers. Let me read this from Deuteronomy, from this reading. You are not to distort justice or show favoritism, and you are not to accept a bribe, for a gift blinds the eyes of the wise and twists the words of even the upright. Justice, only justice you must pursue, so that you will live and inherit the land Adonai your God is giving you. Deuteronomy 16, 19 through 20. And as I close, I encourage you to continue to educate yourselves. This verse is from Hebrews. Remember your leaders, those who spoke God's message to you. Reflect on the results of their way of life and imitate their trust. Yeshua, the Messiah, is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.